Hello students! Week 1, Academic Reading and Writing. We're going to be looking at William Zinsser's On Writing Well this week. But first, I want to go over some things about the course. So this is Dr. Thomas, your English C1000 course, Academic Reading and Writing. It's an asynchronous online course for fall of 2026. My email address is jthomas1@hartnell.edu. This course, let's see. Get this in the screen correctly. Bear with me for one moment. A little smaller. Oh, there we go. This course serves as an introduction to academic reading and writing. What is academic reading and writing? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring throughout the semester. And we have a range of nonfiction texts that we'll be reading to give us a whole bunch of different ideas about what that might mean. Some of the texts we read will be about writing itself, such as this week, On Writing Well. It's about writing. But we'll also be reading a lot of examples of academic writing or of nonfiction writing that we can think about in academic ways. We're going to learn what it means to read with an academic perspective and purpose. We'll be practicing writing in an academic style. So each week there will be a reading assignment, a short writing assignment, and a discussion board. So let me just explain a little bit about that. And then also I wanted to mention that since this is an online course, I highly recommend that you respond to the discussion board with video so we can see your wonderful faces and get to know each other a little bit. If I can do it, you can do it. It'll be more fun that way. So let's do our discussion via video. You can also respond in writing if video is hard for you to achieve. But let's go back to the writing assignment component of the course. This is an intro writing course. And each week I'm going to have you respond to the reading or to a prompt with a 300-word, very short essay. As you'll see in this week's reading, it is sometimes harder to write with brevity, to write with concision, than it is to fill up a page with a certain number of words. So the number of words is a guideline, because we do have a requirement for the semester of 5,000 words. But the idea is to have a thoughtful response. And I'll go over that more in this video, what I want in your response and what I don't want. The first 4 weeks we'll be working on expository writing, writing that describes something. In the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at rhetoric, and we'll be writing persuasive responses. We'll also be learning about argumentation, and we'll write some argumentative responses. And finally, you're going to write, for the last few weeks of the course, you'll be working on a research paper, which will use what you've learned throughout the course with a little bit more sources that you find yourself. Okay, so that's the basic guidelines for the course. Let's take a look at the texts and assignments are on your module. You don't have to buy any texts for the course, but I do want you to print them out. And I'm hoping you can do that at the library if you don't have. The best choice would be to print them out at Hartnell's library. Let me know if you have any problems finding a way to print out the materials, but it is very important to print them out so that you can highlight, mark up, write notes, and be an active reader. That's a big part of what academic reading entails. But you don't have to buy any textbooks for the course. Each week in the modules, you'll find the materials for the week. Right. Each week I'll make one of these videos, a lecture, where I cover the assigned reading. And I will keep the videos to under 30 minutes. But because there are no in-class meetings, it is important that you watch the videos. I will also have Zoom office hours 2 days a week from 6 to 7 p.m. The Zoom meeting link is posted on your syllabus, which is on the home page of your Canvas shell. And email me if you have any questions or challenges joining the meeting. Strongly recommended that you attend office hours, especially if you have any questions about the reading, writing assignments, or our discussion topics. Week 1, we're looking at a book entitled On Writing Well by William Zinsser, who taught writing at Yale University for a long time. For this week's reading assignment, I had you read chapters 1 through 4, pages 2 through 23 of On Writing Well. Chapter 1 is entitled The Transaction. Chapter 2 is entitled Simplicity. Chapter 3 is entitled Clutter. Chapter 4 is entitled Style. Now, I promise you I'm going to be giving you a diverse range of writers and readings that we'll be looking at this semester, but Zinsser makes a bunch of great points for the beginning writer or for a freshman and college level practitioner of English composition, which is you. So I wanted to start you off with some of the advice, the recommendations that Zinsser has about writing. And we will take a look at those ideas now. I wrote down some quotes from each chapter to think about together. In the chapter entitled The Transaction, Zinsser begins his book by imagining or remembering presenting to us a talk that he gave to a group at a school that was for a day devoted to the arts. And he and another writer came and spoke to the student body. So the beginning pages of this chapter, Zinsser sketches out the contrast between himself and this other writer, who he does not treat very respectfully. It's just a shade away from mocking. But in that we can get some of his attitude about the difference between writers who write for fun, writers who write for work, and clearly he sees himself as a professional writer, somebody who writes to achieve a certain goal and not because it's his passion. But let's take a look at, despite this fairly insulting portrait he paints of a writer who he calls Dr. Brock, who he really just uses to contrast himself and his own style of working and his own attitude about writing. He goes on to make a very important point, which is the first quote I've included here, which is that there are all kinds of writers and all kinds of methods, and any method that helps you to say what you want to say is the right method for you. And I thought that was a very generous statement and a true statement, because so many people have written well in a variety of different ways, and there's really no secret method or recipe for writing well. And in fact, I think this is part of what Zinsser does the best, is he points to the fact that your own writing has to come from you, and that the best way to be a good writer is to be authentic, to be yourself. And this brings us to the question of AI, which unfortunately has become a major factor in these courses, in asynchronous courses. And I'm going to begin by giving you the benefit of the doubt, because I think that you enrolled in this course to become a better writer. And obviously, if you use AI to do your assignment, you're not going to grow. But Zinsser gives us very important reasons why your writing is only going to be effective if it's coming from you. The second quote I included from chapter 1, he writes, "They sit down to commit an act of literature." Let me fix that real quick. Oops. Gonna have to. I'll fix that later. It'll be revised in your slides if you choose to open it up. It should say an act of literature. They sit down to commit an act of literature, and the self who emerges on paper is far stiffer than the person who sat down to write. So I want you to think about that first clause. They sit down to commit an act of literature. What is an act of literature? What does it mean to commit an act of literature? What does that connote? What are the secondary meanings? To commit an act, we think of committing an act of murder. Is he talking about the seriousness of writing? Is he talking about the potential for doing damage or the potential for doing good? These are just some things for you to think about. I would argue he's making it seem like something of grave importance. But he's also talking about how writing, one of the challenges of writing is relaxing and being confident at the same time. And that one of the challenges writers face is stiffening up in the act of composition and coming across in a way that doesn't really represent who they are. So I guess that's what he's trying to say, is that taking writing too seriously to commit an act of literature can actually hamper your ability to write in a way that reflects yourself, which Zinsser thinks is the most important thing, because he says later on page 5, ultimately the product that any writer has to sell is not the subject being written about, but who he or she is. So for Zinsser, good writing is a form of salesmanship. it's a form of persuading the reader that you're passionate about this subject and that you have something to say, that you are not going to waste their time, but that you actually want to communicate to the reader, which obviously, if you're using AI, could never be the case. And so it's really, really encouraged that you go through the painful process of working on writing so that you can become confident enough to relax and be yourself in the process of composition. Final quote I wanted to share is also on page 5 when he writes, "This is the personal transaction that's at the heart of good nonfiction writing. Out of it come two of the most important qualities that this book will go in search of: humanity and warmth." I thought that was a pretty good way to describe what good writing is. It's human. A machine could never do it because it has to have the warmth of the human subject, the person who has chosen to be a writer. Chapter 2, simplicity. Now, one of the main points that Zinsser wants to make style-wise is that good writing has to have your ability to erase non-essential aspects. So the first quote I included occurs on page 8, and he writes, "How can the rest of us achieve such enviable freedom from clutter? The answer is to clear our heads of clutter. Clear thinking becomes clear writing." And this really goes into one of the main points that I want to make as we begin our journey together, as we begin this adventure of writing together, which is that writing is a form of thinking, and without clear thinking, your writing will come across in confusing and hard to understand ways, but that through the act of revision, you also can clarify your thinking. And so there is a process through writing that helps us to think better. And that's one of the main purposes of a course like this, is to clarify your thinking by practicing your writing. On page 9, Zinsser states that all writers must therefore constantly ask, "What am I trying to say?" Again, connecting the act of writing to the question of thinking. What is it that you think about your subject, and is your thinking reflective of your own personal experience, of your own something you have to say? Also on page 9, he writes, "A clear sentence is no accident," pointing to the intentionality of good writing. You need to be focused and intentional in your efforts to write clearly. And for Zinsser believes that, as he says on page 9, quote, "If you find that writing is hard, it's because it is hard." So again, returning to this idea that writing doesn't have to be fun, it doesn't have to be joyous, because it is hard, it's work. But that by putting the work in, you can create something great, which will be a pleasure for people to read. All right, the next chapter, Clutter. I only found a couple of things I wanted to share with you. First, that fighting clutter is like fighting weeds. The writer is always slightly behind. I liked this simile because it evokes this image of the work of writing being like farming, of clearing the space for what you want to grow, to thrive, and the work that it takes. In the same way that in farming you see rows of beautiful vegetables, but what you don't see is all the labor it took to remove the weeds to allow those plants to grow. And the other quote is that clutter is the laborious phrase that has pushed out the short word that means the same thing. So he's pointing to a tendency that writers might have sometimes to try to appear more academic than they need to. And that when you start to write an academic paper, sometimes you use words that aren't necessary to the task at hand. And in this chapter, he also points to an essay that we're going to read by George Orwell called Politics in the English Language, where the main point Orwell makes is that people use English to hide the truth, but especially for political reasons. And we want to do the opposite of that. We want to use language to reveal what it is we really want to say, not to dress up a lack of thoughts with fancy words. So I'm not going to be judging you based on the words that you use. I'm going to be trying to help you to articulate your point of view clearly. And this leads to the final chapter we're looking at, which is entitled Style. Zinsser writes, "But you can never forget that you are practicing a craft that is based on certain principles." And in this section, he's comparing writing to building a house, and he's reiterating the point that it's not about creating something fancy or elegant or opulent, but that actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to create something sound and solid and fundamentally strong. And the way that you do this is by practicing the basics, not by trying to make something sound more intelligent than the thought behind it, but actually to share what it is that you think. So he follows this idea through when he writes, quote, "Therefore, a fundamental rule is be yourself." That's on page 19. And it's easier said than done, but it is the essence of good writing. You have to be yourself. Writing is a form of thinking. You're the one doing the thinking. That's what we want from you. We want to know your thoughts. We want to hear where you're coming from and to see you formulate your own ideas. Because, as he writes on page 21, style is tied to the psyche and writing has deep psychological roots. Meaning that your own personal style is going to come out of your experience. And you simply cannot replace that with AI. It's not possible, because you're the only version of you that matters, and we're here to develop, we're here to grow. And so doing the work is going to help you communicate better. His last quote that I'm going to talk about this week is on page 23. He writes, "Sell yourself and your subject will exert its own appeal. Believe in your own identity and your own opinions. Writing is an act of ego, and you might as well admit it. Use its energy to keep yourself going." Which I thought was an interesting way to end his chapter on style. It's not something that is neutral or disinterested. It's actually a reflection of who you are. So be yourself, sell yourself, be there in the writing as the voice behind the writing, the one thinking the thoughts that you're expressing, and you will do your best work. All right, we're going to take a look at the writing assignment for this week. Again, we're in the expository essay section of the course, which means you're going to show the reader something about, in this case, a beginning section of a book. So I want you to, in 300 words or less, paraphrase Zinsser's key ideas. You should use quotes from the reading to support your explanation of the text. What we're going to be practicing is making claims and supporting those claims with textual evidence. I want to know what it is that you think about these chapters. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you unsure at this point? Are you open to experimenting with these ideas? Do you think that they're hogwash? What is your real thoughts about the ideas in these 4 chapters? And use quotes to show the reader what it is you are responding to. All right, that is it for this week. We have a discussion board where I want you to share a quote and explain what it is that you like about it, or think about it, or dislike about it, agree or disagree. I also want you to respond to 2 other students in the class, agreeing with them, disagreeing with them, challenging them to think further, sharing your own point of view about the matter. All right? We'll have a Zoom office hour Tuesday, 6 to 7, Thursday, 6 to 7. Email me with any questions. I hope you enjoy reading Zinsser, and happy writing. I'll talk to you soon.